Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome back for another episode of On the Run with Beards and Dunn. And we have a guest with us today, and I'm going to do a brief introduction. But before we get to that, Dick, you're in Bemidji, Minnesota, right?
Oh, yeah, sure, you betcha there, up here in the
What
North Country.
What's the temperature today in Bemidji, Minnesota?
Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I just came in from snow blowing our driveway because we got a bunch of snow yesterday, and the actual temperature is minus 13 degrees below zero. But the sun is out, there's no wind.
Oh,
It was really pleasant outside.
Well, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, and it's about 45 degrees and sunny here, and it's really pleasant outside here too. Our guest, Toni Reavis. Toni,
Oh,
where are you at? What's the weather like there?
I'm in San Diego, California, but I, like you, am wearing a hoodie. I mean, it was in the 40s, mid 40s this morning, but it's going up to 65 this afternoon.
I love it.
nice.
Well, Toni Reavis is our guest, and
I'm
I
so
don't
excited
know.
about having Toni on.
I am too.
He's a legend in running and broadcasting. I'm telling
I
you.
only know Toni by his reputation. I've never had the opportunity or the pleasure of meeting him, so I had to do a little quick research. I know who Toni Reavis is, but I don't know deep, and so I did a little looking here. And Toni, if I say something wrong, correct me. The Runner's Digest was a radio show that you
Mhm.
originated in 1977.
That's correct.
Out of Boston, and that show ran for till it says on the internet till 1988.
That's correct. That's right.
And then you also did ESPN Race of the Month show
Uh-huh.
is all through the 80s and 90s.
That's right.
That was a great show.
You were inducted into the Running USA Hall of Champions in 2009. And how does your running ability must be fantastic, Toni, to be able to.
I was a very good female runner. Sadly, I was an adult male at the time.
And Dick just shared with me in 2022, you were honored with the George Hirsch Journalism Award. And if people don't know who George Hirsch is, they better look that one up. But Toni's a legend for broadcasting, reporting, writing on the topic of running. And so I'm thrilled. And Dick, anything you want to share before we turn it loose here?
Well, yeah, I've had the opportunity I've known Toni for 40 plus years, and I've had the opportunity to do a few things with him. I know I've been on some panels that Toni has emceed over the years, and it's always fun. He's a running encyclopedia. I mean, seriously. And Toni, thanks for being on with us today.
Good to see you again, Dick and Mike. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, and Toni, you just got back from the Honolulu Marathon, which you go out to that every year to do what, broadcasting? What do you do out there for the Honolulu Marathon?
We do a live broadcast of the show for the NBC affiliate in Honolulu, Hawaii News Now. They do an excellent job. But I've been going to that marathon every year since 1979, except for the COVID years.
Wow.
My gosh.
We got married there. This is our 22nd anniversary. It was on the same last Sunday as the Honolulu Marathon. And it's because when I decided to get married, my wife had never been to Honolulu, always wanted to go. And so it was like a month or so before the marathon. And of course, I know Dr. Jim Barahall and John Cross and all the people there. They were runners at Michigan with Greg Meyer back in the day when Coach Ron Warhurst was first taking the Michigan job. So that connection goes way, way back. And so when I called Jim up and I said, Jim, do you know anyone who can marry us? A priest, a minister, a rabbi, a boat captain. And he said, oh, my God, you're getting married. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. Next thing you know, we got married by a catamaran boat captain named Crash Nakamura. But he was legal.
Right. You'll never forget that.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm so,
Barefoot on the beach at sunset.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm such a rookie here. Take us back, Toni. Take us back. What was your upbringing? How did you get the love of running, obviously, and you were a runner. I know that. Bring us through that.
No, I was not.
High school,
I was not
college.
a runner. I was a high jump enthusiast.
Ah.
My hero was John Thomas and Valerie Brumell back in the Soviet Union, USA dual meet days back in the 60s.
Barrel rollers.
Yeah, well, straddlers, right?
Straddlers.
I grew up in St. Louis, and I was always a track athlete fan. I mean, the first Olympics I remember vividly was 1960 with Wilma Rudolph. And my big hero, John Thomas, is at the world record at the Olympic trials at 7.3 3/4. And then I remember vividly going to the front porch one morning after the high jump competition, before these things were on television, and picking up the Globe Democrat and seeing how he had taken third place, the bronze medal. And I was crushed. and it was Shevlikadze from the Soviet Union, and Valery Bromell took gold and silver. John Thomas took bronze. But I was always a big track fan. And then in 1974, I moved from St. Louis to Boston. A good friend of mine from Washington University was a runner in school, and then he joined the Greater Boston Track Club, and I met Bill Rogers socially. I was a
Sure.
runner, but I met him socially. And by this time, in 77, I had become a news broadcaster at one of the local radio stations because everyone kept telling me, you sound like you're on the radio, you ought to be in broadcasting.
Right.
And I heard that every day of my life. And finally, I said, 50,000 Polish children can't all be wrong. And so I opened up the yellow pages and started calling radio stations saying, you ought to hire me. Finally got a job. And by 1977, then I'd spent 2 years working as a newsman. And I said to the news director, let me cover the marathon this year. I know Bill. Well,
Yeah.
Bill didn't win that year. It was warm, and Jerome Drayton beat him, and Bill dropped out on Heartbreak Hill and went down to the Elliott Lounge. But the bottom line was I sort of weighed everything afterwards, and I said, I think I like these runners better than I like criminals and judges and
Right.
politicians. And so I borrowed some money from my father, which was a task in itself because he used to have these little axioms he would say, like, Tone, when we fly for the nest, we fly alone.
Mm.
But I still got the
Gotcha.
money out of him anyway. And so that's when I started Runner's Digest. And it was a weekly 1 hour radio talk show about running, and no one had ever done anything like that before. But with Bill being the best runner in the world at the time,
Right.
and him opening his running store 2 blocks from my apartment on Beacon
Oh,
Street
my.
at the
Wow.
23-mile mark of the marathon, I just walk up there every day. And when the store closed, I go run with Bill. It was his
Yeah.
second run of the day, my only run of the day. But I would carry my tape recorder with me. And we go run around Jamaica Pond. I don't know, Dickie, if you've ever run around Jamaica
Right.
Pond from Cleveland
Yes.
Circle.
Yep.
Well, we go 1 lap would be 6 miles, 2 laps would be 7.5, 3 miles would be like 10. So we just run around there and talk. And Bill's a yapper too. And so
Right.
I still have those interviews on tape.
Oh.
I mean, for instance, here's Aldo Scanduro. Here's a tape from 1980.
My
July 30,
gosh.
about professional running. Aldo Scandura was the Newsday Marathon head and one of the USA track and field officials in Long Island. But I've got all these scads of these things. Here's the 1981 Milrose Games tape.
Oh my
Anyways,
gosh.
I have 500 audio cassettes from back in my Runner's Digest days.
No,
So
cassette tapes.
you say I'm
I
an
love it.
encyclopedia. Well, I've got it all on tape.
Well, Tony, have you ever as long as we're on that subject, have you ever thought like putting like an album together or something like that? I mean,
Album.
gosh, I can't imagine. I mean, the amount of people that would want to listen to some of these tapes that from back then.
I got one run with Bill. SoundCloud? Do you have no SoundCloud?
Okay, I'm familiar.
That's another
with
one of
SoundCloud.
these
Yeah.
operations that you can put sound on, and most people write songs and stuff. But I got some of my runs up there. I used to a compilation about the Boston weather. I used to do a lot of compilation pieces about the Boston hills, the Boston weather, the Boston course. I talked to all these people, then little like one sentence, like I remember Johnny Miles, the 1928 and 1932 Boston Marathon champion from Canada, interviewing him. He was back in Boston at the 50th anniversary of, well, it must have been 1978, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm talking to Johnny Miles, and I remember his quote was, "It's really turned into a monster, hasn't it?" So I would take, "It's really turned into a monster, hasn't it?" And just that clip. Amby Burfoot was saying, "It's the best day of the year for runners," and I would just string together all these one little clips with all these voices. I would then take music, which had like a rise and a fall,
Yeah.
and I would slot the audio inside the music. And then I would have one time I took a microphone and I tape recorded it to the back of the lead press truck of the Boston Marathon so that I could get the sound from the crowd the entire way.
Oh, cool.
Then I forgot what year that was. It might have been 79 or 80, one of those years. So then I would lay that sound underneath. So the sound of the crowd, the sound of the music, and then the voices coming in, the voices coming in, the voices coming in. And
Wow.
I do stuff like that, and I just, I'd be sort of produce pieces for the show. So I got some of
Amazing.
that up on SoundCloud. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yes, but this thing is I've got so much stuff, and it's also I keep journals. For instance, I'm writing in this one. This one's number 276, going back till 1981. Let me see if I can do this. Um, there's one. Do you see that
Oh, yeah.
bookcase? There's that one bookcase. I got two of these, two bookcases full of all my journals,
Wow.
and I've got all that stuff written down.
Tony,
That's
I hate
why
to
I
say
sort
this.
of have an understanding of what's going on in the sport, because I can literally go back and
Look it
read
up.
the interviews I did before the 1982, 1983, the 82 Dickie. I mean,
Yeah.
in that 1982 Boston Marathon, we put together a 75 station network uh, of radio stations around the country to cover the Boston Marathon.
Really?
We did. And this is before I was at the finish line.
Yeah.
I had 6 reporters along the side of the course, including uh, we had Kevin Ryan.
Oh,
We
sure.
had Todd Miller. Remember Todd?
Yep.
Todd, he was the first promo man for Nike in the East Coast. He was a co-host of my radio show. Uh, we had Scotty Graham,
Oh,
Greater Boston
yeah.
Track Club guy.
You bet.
So I had guys that knew about running, and a couple of guys in radio who didn't know running that well. And I gave him a press guide, which I had written up about all what you guys had done before the race, so they had something
Yeah.
to talk about. And then we did like little 5-minute inserts 4 times an hour to 75 stations along the way.
Wow. Had no idea.
Yeah, so it was one of those things where the sport was booming and there was a
Yes.
real interest in the game. And we started in 1979. I started taking my local show and I did a 3-minute, not a 3-minute, but I did like a little 1.5, 2-minute nationally syndicated version of the show. And we would send out 5 shows on reel to reel tape to each of these stations around the country. And then there was a Nike commercial. They were our sponsor, but there was also a place for a 30 or 60-second local availability, which they would sell.
Oh,
So they didn't
sure.
pay us. We would give them the show. They would send back affidavits saying they had aired it at this date on this time. We would send all those affidavits every month to Nike, and they would pay us X amount per affidavit.
Nice.
And so we did that for 3 years. So
Wow.
we were constantly trying to figure out how to monetize this thing called running.
Absolutely.
Now your journals. I got to bring this up. The do you? I hate this. This is uncomfortable to ask. If you ever aren't able to, how do I maintain your journal when you're not gone? When you're gone, Tony, what's going to happen to your journals?
Good question. I was thinking about that. I don't know who. I don't know
I do.
who would want them. I mean,
I
because
do.
it's not just. Believe me, it's. See, the thing is, it got started. One of the things I did very well in school was take notes. I didn't do very well in tests, but I did very well in taking notes. And when I got into, I did not study to be a journalist or a broadcaster. I studied to be a social studies teacher.
I'll be
And
darned.
I got as far as student teaching. I student taught for a year in St. Louis, teaching Chinese history at a high school in St. Louis.
Wow.
But anyway, when they told me you can't talk to them like that, uh, I was 22, they were 16, so we were almost the same darn age.
Right.
I said, talk to them like how? You'll notice they don't cut my class. You notice that.
Yeah.
They cut everyone else's class. They don't cut my class. So maybe other people should be talking to them like I'm talking to
Like a
them.
real person.
Right.
But the word I heard in their criticism was conformity. I'm not one of those. And so I said, well, I don't think I can be a teacher for you people. And so I'm going to leave teaching. But I took the lessons I learned in my education minor and brought that to my broadcasting. So when I started taking notes, all I heard is that people say, "Oh, not to me, but in general, oh, I was misquoted. I was misquoted."
Hmm.
So I started taking notes on every telephone conversation I had. Every conversation, I take notes. And so
Wow.
that's what it is. So if somebody ever came to me and said, yeah, I was misquoted, I could bring to them 276 journals and 500 hours of audio tape and say, what's more likely?
Here's
I
the
got
thing.
it wrong or you misremembered.
Yeah.
I know we
So
can
that's
talk about
why I
this
do
later,
it. Is
perhaps,
I
but
did it as a protection device, and it so often happens in life. You have an idea, shortly thereafter, the idea takes you
hmm,
and turns into something else.
Sure.
I'd
So
like.
when all the conversations I ever had with my mother and father, my brother and my sister, my friends, I mean everything, I wrote it down, and it's all
Wow.
because running's the best teacher I ever had, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys.
Yeah.
Never felt better in my life, never felt worse in my life, sometimes a couple of minutes apart, right?
Yeah.
So true.
But so you learn not to get too high when you're feeling good and not to get too low when you're feeling bad. You
Yep.
soldier on one step at a time, right?
Yep.
And so what you learn is you just soldier on, but it's all work product. So not every training session is going to be the killer, but it's like it's all part of a continuum. And what I do today has no value outside the context of what I did yesterday and what I must do again tomorrow. I don't care how good your training is, it has to comport to the entire spectrum of your training. Well, it's the same thing in doing broadcasting and journalism. You constantly have to do work product. So 99% of the stuff in these journals is just work product. But every once in a while, boom, you get the really good stuff. But it
Wow.
comes out of the work product, not waiting for inspiration. So that's why I do it. But now I can go back. So when I go back to the Honolulu Marathon every year, I take the previous two journals from the years I was there to look at the interviews and what they told me then. So if the guys come back as defending champion, I can relate it to what he said last year
Good idea.
and what he says this year and see how much of a liar he was last year.
Tony, I tell you, I've been a fishing guide since I was a kid, and I do that after every fishing guide trip. I write down, how the day went, what we caught, names, stuff like that, and little tidbits because I get a lot of people that come back year after year, and it's fun to look back and you might say, "Hey, how's your grandson Joe doing on the baseball team?" It's like, wow,
Right.
he remembered
No,
that.
no, no. Well, I can, for instance, after the 1983, I was at Grandma's in 1983, Grandma's
Yeah,
Marathon. The only year I ever did it. Scott Keenan,
Keenan.
right, asked me to
right.
do it. So I came and did that. And afterwards, uh, Gary Bjorklund and about four or five other of us went up the Boundary Waters.
Yes, that was a tradition back then after the race.
And we spent a week on the Boundary Waters. And I was taking notes the whole damn time. So I can go back and relive that trip, including the
Wow.
4 mile of all the portaging we had to do with
Right?
those goddamn canoes, and the four, like we found this like 2 mile logging road that we used to paddle over to every day to do our
Yeah,
run.
sure.
And because it was so isolated, there was these tens of thousands of butterflies and dragonflies that would be on the trees, and you would have to run going like this to get the bugs out of your face.
Oh,
But
mercy.
I can go back and I can relive that trip almost like an hour by hour
Amazing.
well,
basis.
well,
So
Tony,
it's
here's the
fun to
thing.
do.
SDSU, South Dakota State University, where Dick and I attended, they have a great track tradition running cross country. They had a great amateur, the Prairie Strider Track Club, and we had a good friend, and he was on our podcast. I would highly recommend Bob Bartling. Bob is just a legend in the Midwest for running, promoting. He started a library in the 70s. He's got every issue of Runner's World, every issues of
Wow.
any publication, any book ever
That had to
published,
do with running
anything to do with
Yeah.
running. He kept
and,
this library at his
and
business,
cataloged everything.
cataloged it. He
Wow.
eventually donated it to South Dakota State University. It's at their main library on campus. And it is second to none. I think New York Runners Club has a fairly extensive running library. And
Yeah. Yep.
somebody who's looked at it, and I'm trying to, I hate to drop some names, but there's some very famous people that have looked at the Prairie Strider running library. And it's one of those things. I've talked to Joe Henderson about it too, because Joe is you and Joe
Oh
are
yeah.
two peas in a pod.
Prolific.
He was kind of in the same situation of like, what is going to happen to my journals, all of his writings that he has hard copy of there.
Right.
When and he's been kind of like you. Gee, the thought has crossed my mind. You hate to, admit our own mortality here or whatever. But and if that's something that intrigues you and you want to do a little more research on it, I'd encourage it.
They do have that new marathon museum going up in Hopkinton.
Oh, is
Massachusetts,
there?
at the
Oh,
starting line of the Boston Marathon. A
big.
a fairly extensive,
Wow.
large, yeah, museum that Tim Kilduff. Remember Tim Kilduff?
Sure.
Tim was like the bridge race director between the forced retirement of Will Cloney after the Marshall Medoff matter.
Yes.
And people
Oh,
never heard of Marshall Medoff, but that's a whole saga about the Boston
no
Marathon.
kidding.
Uh, but anyway, Tim was like the bridge to Guy Morse,
Mm.
and the whole transition. I was thinking about, obviously there's a book in me about running, and part of it was had the transition from the amateur to I only call it semi-pro, because as I said, running is a lot like Catholic girls. They didn't go all the way,
True.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The ARRA, the Association of Road Race Athletes in the
Yep.
early 80s, but you guys tried to get together and create a union and a professional tour.
Right.
And you went there to that, Cascade runoff, and you basically put your thumb in the eye of the Athletics Congress, and you got them to sort of change. But then you took the TAC Trust road out, which
Right.
was like it didn't quite go to the full way to be professional. So the
No.
athletes got their money, but the public never looked at our sport as professional. And to this day, they say, well, how can you run the Olympics and make money? So we're still caught in that netherworld where we're not amateur, we're not professional, and it hampers the sport in its growth. There's a million topics and the frustrations of what this sport has turned into, which I believe is an activity, not a sport.
Yeah.
Even the World Marathon Majors has forgotten about elite athletes anymore. Running USA was begun to try to regenerate American distance running at the highest levels. The minute Dina and Meb got their medals in Athens in 2004, they said, well, our job here is done.
Yeah.
I said, no, why don't you start another camp in Flagstaff? Why don't you start another one in Boulder? Why don't you start another one in New Mexico? Next thing you know, why don't you start a goddamn tour? No, our job is done. And that was the end of that.
I
World
know.
Marathon Majors tried the same thing. How do we elevate professional athletics and give $1 million to the top athletes?
Right.
Next thing you know, it's $50,000, and what they're really concerned about is those 6-star medals for participants.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so different, Tony. So as long as we're kind of in that realm of what running's doing, so you know what happened at Chicago this past October.
Oh yeah.
Okay, the gal from Kenya, I'm still have a hard time swallowing this. Tony, as you know, there's not a lot of men that can break 210. When you look at on a wide range. Here, this
Frank
gal
Shorter never broke 210.
no. And what are your thoughts on this whole thing? And
All right.
I mean, because now every time a man or woman runs a fast time in a marathon, boy, the red flags come up. They got to be doping. What's going on? And the shoes and everything.
Well, in the same sense that even the biggest fans of the sport cannot say that every great record is clean, every doubter cannot say every great time is dirty.
Right.
In my journal, a couple of days ago, since 2019, Ruth Chetengedich has ranked in 2019. She was number 2 in the world with her 2:17:08 win in Dubai. In 2022, she was a world leader with her 2:14:18 in Chicago. In 2023, she was number 3 in the world at 2:15:37 in Chicago. And this year, of course, number 1 with her 2:09:56 win in Chicago. She did not come into the Chicago Marathon this year to try to win the race. She'd already done that twice before.
Yeah.
Both times going under 66 minutes in the first half and fading a little bit late. She did not come into this race to try to break the world record of 2:11:53 by Tigist Assefa from Ethiopia from Berlin in 2023. Because of the nature of her pacing, when you have pacers, they just don't go out and run how they feel. They run a specific pace.
Right.
She came into this race to run under 2:10.
She did.
The pacer was going on at that pace.
Yeah.
True. Wow.
In fact, she was going faster than that. But the bottom line is she already knew the Chicago course intimately, 2 firsts and a second place. Since 2019, she's been in the top 3 in the world almost every year. I mean, I'm not saying it's 100% clean.
But you're
saying
saying it could be, though.
I'm saying that there's a thing called punctuated equilibrium. Professor Gould from Harvard years ago, an anthropologist, said Does not work on an even scale, on an even slide. There are moments of jumps, and if you take a look at all the records, back from Beth Bonner first broke 3 hours in 1971 at the New York City Marathon, all the way to Ruth Chetton Gedich here in Chicago in October of 2024, and you take a look at the percentages of changes. When Greta Weitz ran her 2:32:30 at the 1978 New York City Marathon, it broke the world record by like 3 or 4 minutes, but it was only like a 1.35% difference than the previous record.
Yeah.
That was over 3% difference when she ran in 2:27 the following year, when she knew what she was doing a little bit more and trained more specifically. But all the way to Paula Radcliffe, which was like 1.4% faster than the time before that, which was Catherine Derevis 2:18:47 from Chicago back in 2001. In other words, you see these incremental changes.
Yeah.
Well, Ruth Chetton Gedich was only like a little over 1.x% better than Titus Osifa. And Osifa was only 1% better than Bridget Kosgei. It comports with the slices that have been done in the past. It was a fairly big slice, but it wasn't an off the charts slice.
Okay. Interesting.
I'm saying with the introduction of super shoes, and now the sodium bicarbonate, which is reducing the acidity in the muscles, which holds off the fatigue of muscles.
Oh.
When you add, that's the new thing that these kids are taking.
Oh, it is.
So
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's like before, but you have to do it in a form. If you take it by itself, sodium bicarbonate, if you take it, it makes you throw up.
Yeah.
It doesn't settle in the stomach. Like this company, Marten, Maurten, I believe, makes a product which you can actually take and keep down, and it holds off the acidity in the working muscles, which prevents fatigue. So now you've got not only the shoes, which are worth, if you take 215.25 out of Paula Radcliffe, you take 4% from that, you get 210 flat.
Hey,
Nice.
shoes are crazy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're flinging devices. I mean,
Right.
but what happened was Nike, being the 800-pound gorilla in the room, didn't ask for permission to change it. They just introduced it at the Olympic trials in 2016 in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
right? And so
Right.
Shalane Flanagan wore them, and Amy Craig wore them, and Galen Rupp. And then all three medalists in Rio 2016 wore them. And then finally somebody looked at a picture and said, what in the name of God are those things? Because in our day, used to have our training shoes, 10 ounces.
Yeah.
Racing flats, 6 ounces. 4 ounces per shoe at the end of your foot, distal weight, having to cycle through 1,000 times per stride equals thousands of pounds that you have to carry over the marathon distance if you wore the 10-ounce shoe. But you couldn't wear racing flats in training because you'd destroy yourself.
Right.
So the new shoes, the lightness of the racing flat with the cushioning of the training shoe. That's the combination.
Yes.
But then the original Vaporfly was set up more for a midfoot, like a rolling stride, like a rocker.
Yeah.
The new Alpha Fly is more for the toes, for the set and push off types. In other words, guys that run, we saw some great runners. There's great cross country runners, track runners, and road runners, right? And usually guys like Joseph Kamani. Remember Joseph Kamani from Kenya?
Yeah.
He still has records all around the poor thing's dead now. But he was like always fourth or fifth in the Kenyan track trials at 10,000 meters. He was more of a road runner. He rolled. He wasn't up on his foot. Haile Gebrselassie was a toe runner.
See, I was too.
He was not a great cross country runner. Haile was unstable on grass.
Sure.
So he got silver medal one time, but he was not a great cross country runner. He was a track guy. And I was over in Ethiopia in the late 1990s, and I talked to his coach as he was doing a track workout around the national stadium. And I said, what do you think of Haile as a potential marathon runner? And the coach said, I think he'd be a great marathon runner, but I have to change a sports car into a rally car. He uses too much oxygen in his stride because he's not going to run out of fuel at 5 and 10,000 meters, but he will at the marathon. So we've got to bring him back down off his stride
Sure.
a little bit. He can't run up there perched like that.
Mm.
So those are some of the nuances of the game. But these shoes now, so for certain athletes, you can put them in one shoe, and how well do they adapt to those shoes? And
Yeah.
the studies have been done showing that if in the right shoe, you might get as much as an 11%
Wow.
improvement. But the wrong shoe on the wrong athlete with the wrong stride might give you a deficit of 11%.
Ah.
So depending on the shoe, you might have a 22% range of how you will adapt to that shoe. Well, the difference in athletes is nowhere near as great as that range in the shoes.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we're measuring, in a sense, is the quality of the adaptability to the shoe and not the differences in athletes.
Right.
Very similar to Formula One car racing. It used to be that Lewis Hamilton couldn't lose. He won 7 titles. Next thing you know, they changed what the car's setup would be,
Yeah.
and now he can't get on the podium. But and Verstappen became the winner 3 years in a row. Then they changed again, and now Verstappen can't get on the podium anymore, right?
Right.
So did they become crappy drivers? It's got nothing to do with the driver. It's got to do with the car. In our sport, it's got to do with the shoes.
So what do you see happening with shoes? Pretty much status quo, or are they gonna come up with some other difference in them that makes them even better?
They always do. I mean, look at pole vaulting, right? Or listen, a real interesting happened several years ago. They took Andre DeGrasse, the gold medalist at 200 meters and the silver medalist before that at the 100 meters, right? Canada sprinter.
Yep.
And they took Andre DeGrasse to a track as closely as they could make it to the 1936 Olympic track in Berlin, where Jesse Owens ran the world record in the 100 meters.
Yeah.
And they made by hand a pair of track spikes as close as they could to the shoes that Jesse Owens wore. And then they gave him a hand trowel and made him dig his starting hole because they didn't use starting blocks, right?
Right.
Now, there were not 50,000 people in the stands, including Herr Hitler.
Right.
But in those shoes, on that track, using starting holes, not starting blocks, Andre DeGrasse could not break 11 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
How good was Jesse Owens?
Wow. Amazing.
So what I'm saying, there's always going to be these improvements that come along. Look what happened from cinder tracks to
Right.
tartan tracks, and now the indoor tracks. I mean, it's constant improvement. What I would like to have happen, like we have in cycling, is have wattage meters. So we know the exact amount of athlete force input into the stride, because with the new shoes right now, the metabolic cost for that stride is much less than it was when you guys were running.
Sure.
In other words, the effort that you guys are running, Dick, back 2.8 on that day, unbelievable. I mean, that was a crappy day to run.
Right. Yeah.
Warm day. And Boston's an open course and that sun was beating down. I mean, who knows how fast you guys would have run if it was like a 1975 day when Billy ran 2.955.
Yeah,
Or
who
Greg's
knows?
year, 1 year later when Greg ran 2.9 flat.
Yeah.
Right? And Joni
Yeah.
ran her world record.
Right.
But there's always going to be improvements.
Sure.
And the people from the past are always going to look skeptically at what's happening now. But it's just the
True.
nature of human. It's just the human of human. It's
It
human
is.
nature.
It is. It is.
That is awesome.
I think I'm talking too
remember a guy
much.
named Bill
No.
Adcox from Great Britain?
Who?
Bill Adcox?
Oh,
Marathon?
yeah, sure.
What do you think his shoes were? He ran a 2:10:30 over in Europe
Right,
somewhere.
exactly. Well,
And they
Ron
were
Hill
probably
ran
bedroom
2:10:30 on a rainy day in Boston in 1970.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Same
pretty
day as
remarkable.
almost the same conditions in 1984 when Jeff Smith ran his 2:10:30.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So, Tony, I got to ask you. So, living out in Boston as long as you did, surely you must have had some times with Coach Bill Squires.
Yeah. Classic story.
Oh,
So
yeah, please share some with us, because
Okay,
Coach
we're
was my
talking-
coach, and I loved him like a grandpa.
Oh, exactly. Well, we all loved him to death. So we're driving down to the Millrose games, right? And
Yeah.
we're driving down with Kevin Ryan and Coach Squires. And, Kevin Ryan, New Zealander, Olympian,
Oh, I
but
knew Kevin
funny,
well.
very acerbic, very funny.
Yes.
So we got a case of Foster's. I'm in the back seat. Squires is riding shotgun, and Kevin's driving 100 miles an hour. Somehow he knew where the state cops were, and he slowed down just in time, and we would never got a ticket. So we're telling stories. And Squires telling a story about the time that the NCAAs were out in Los Angeles. And while they were out there, Photo Play magazine set up him and another 400-meter guy from some other school on dates with Annette Funicello and Natalie Wood.
Oh my gosh.
And they would take pictures, etc.
Yeah.
And so Squires is saying, well, his date that night was, he called her Natalie, not Natalie, but
Yeah.
Natalie Wood was going out with him. Can you, anyway, so he said, so Kevin Ryan, just go. So he was talking about having a date with Natalie Wood. And here's Kevin Ryan driving, and he looks over and says, no way a beautiful woman like go out with an ugly prick like you. Squires goes, me? I was handsome. Are you kidding me? 6 foot tall, 160 pounds, blonde, crew cut hair. Are you kidding me?
You sound just like him, Tony.
Yeah, he was incensed. He was incensed that somebody would consider him, that Natalie Wood would go out with him. And then he told a story one time at his roommate at Notre Dame that at night, the bathroom was down the hall. He didn't want to go down the hall. So if he had to pee at night, he'd go pee in the sink in the room. His roommate got all upset and reported into the Monitor. They called him in front of a board, and Squires had done his homework, and he proved how during the Boer War, the soldiers used to use urine to disinfect their weapon, and how it really wasn't a bad thing. It was a disinfectant, you know.
Oh.
And what happened was the board says, we don't give a damn what the Boer War did. Stop peeing in the sink at night. So those are just two little stories on the drive down to the Millrose games.
Yeah, he was something else.
No, Tony,
You know, that's the thing I found. I don't know about you guys. One of the things I loved about Boston, and I think it's the same in New York City, maybe it's how densely packed. There's a lot of people in a small area.
Yeah.
I never met a character like Bill Squires in St. Louis in my life.
No.
I never met anyone like Tommy Leonard in St. Louis in my life.
No.
The characters.
Yeah, that's what they were both. Just loving characters. Yes.
Yeah, these were like Damon Runyon-esque characters.
Yeah.
They just had this. There's no one else I've ever met. I've never said in my life, that guy reminds me of Bill Squires.
No,
unique.
Totally unique.
So Tony, I got to ask, all the people you've met over the years, and I'm not trying to call anybody out here or put you on a spot. Was there an interview that I want both extremes. One was like, this guy was the easiest, or gal was the easiest interview I ever had, and this one was the toughest. I had to work my butt off.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that anyone who makes money in running owes Bill Rogers money. Because God bless Frank Shorter. I love Frank Shorter.
Yep.
What a job he did for running. You got to get lucky. Every sport has to be lucky who their champions are because it's a meritocracy.
Right.
Frank was rather taciturn during his heyday. Right. He's mellowed a lot in his older age.
He has.
He's just a wonderful wife, wonderful family, and Frank's a wonderful company. But he wasn't always so.
No.
A little bit withdrawn.
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the bottom line, Frank was hard to approach at the time.
Yes.
Bill was the boy next door who
Yes.
happened to be the best runner in the world.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about Bill, and people don't always know this, he took his master's degree in special ed and taught special ed for a while. Anyone who has that sort of empathetic approach, anyone who wants to deal with special ed kids,
sure,
that's got real humanity to him. That's right. Bill. And so Bill was so approachable. As I said, his store was 2 blocks from my house. So you go run with Bill, and he was always so open, always so willing to talk.
Right.
On the other hand, Jerome Drayton was much less so. I mean, I called him one time, leading into one of the, maybe the 77 Boston Marathon. I said, well, I hate to bother you, and this must, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, it must not be easy. He says, no, it's not. And he was just, it was like, I felt like I should be wearing a smock and like a thing, because I felt like I was pulling teeth.
I bet.
Trying to get he was not a friendly customer. And one of the things I found about running and why I loved it so much is because it's 98.6% asshole free. It's a humbling sport, as
Yes.
you all well know. And so you don't see a lot of braggarts.
No.
You find really quality people. And so, yeah, but those are just two. I think Bill was easy as easy could be, and Jerome was hard as hard could be.
How about Alberto and Dick Beardsley? You know, those two. What would you say?
Dickie was easy as could be. I mean, Dickie's been one of the things you've always been, Dick, is you've been the same person today as you were 40, 50 years ago.
You're right.
The same guy.
That's who I am.
And easily accessible. Now, because I've known Alberto since he was 17 and lived out in Wayland, Mass. Myself and Joe Kincannon, who was the writer for the Boston Globe.
Sure.
Alberto and I, we were very easy and close. He would call us up before that 82 race. He says, I'm coming into town with Molly, and this is when I'm landing. If you guys want to meet me at the airport, please do. Because I was writing for the Boston Herald back then, as well as doing my radio show. So we went out there. His father had called up all the other media. And when Joe and I got out there, all these television cameras were there. And we shrank back. Alberto was so pissed.
Oh, he was.
His father done that he went to a hotel and did not go home.
Wow.
For a couple of days.
Yeah.
But and then after the race on Monday, that Tuesday, Alberto said to Joe and I, come out to the house in Wayland if you want to do an interview.
Nice.
So I've got that tape. So Alberto was always very forthcoming. And so what happened to Alberto later in life now has always been very tragic.
Yeah.
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 How about one more name? We had Patty Catalano on. I don't know what your relationship. What do you think of Patty?
Yes.
Patty and her first husband, she's had 4, but Patty and Joe Catalano lived with me and my first wife in my loft on Beacon Street for 6 months.
Oh, be darned.
She needed a place. She was married to a guy named John Latorra in Quincy, Mass. Right? And upstairs lived Joe Catalano. Next thing you know, Joe started running with Patty. The next thing you know, Patty moved upstairs with Joe. and John took it poorly. So I got a call from Todd Miller saying they need a place to stay. Can you help? And I said, okay. So they lived in my loft.
Wow.
800 square foot apartment with my wife and I for supposed to be for a week. They stayed 6 months.
She was a firecracker when we had her on.
Eddie and I we go run every day. No, they're still Dan Dillon, who's our husband now.
Great guy, and great people,
and a wonderful, wonderful partnership that has become.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aaron and Raven, their kids are fabulous. Danny's the salt of the earth.
You bet.
Patty's still the same firecracker, but they're a perfect match. Perfect match. So I was so happy for her because she went through some real ups and downs getting there.
Yeah,
well, she's a sweetheart.
Between you and Coach Squires and Patty, that authenticity, I really enjoyed having her on our podcast because what you saw is what you got. She didn't, and I'm getting that same vibe from you, Tony. The stories you're telling aren't fabricated; they're sincere and coming right from the heart. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tony, we can go on and on and on and on. And I just want to, I can't thank you enough, especially, with the holidays right around the corner here and everybody's busy. But Mike and I sure appreciate you taking the time because you are one busy guy and it's an honor to have you on our show and we sure do appreciate it. So we want to thank you so much.
Bless your heart, Mike. Delight meeting you. Dickie, always good seeing you. And happiest of holidays and the best of New Year to you both.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, Tony. I want to thank everybody for listening today. And if you have any questions for Dunn or myself, comments about our show, you can contact us directly on our website at beardsanddunnpod.com, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X at Beards and Dunn Pod.
And if you're watching on YouTube, we'd sure love to hear a comment, or please subscribe if you'll get a notification when we're putting up a new podcast. But Tony, best wishes to you. Merry Christmas. This is going to come out before Christmas. And so I really enjoyed this opportunity to get to interact with you, and God bless you.
Yep.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Thanks, Tony. Bye-bye. Mike, I got to head to PT, buddy.
All right. Have a good day, Beards.
You too.